Imagine dying and then waking up again. Not in a hospital, not in your body, but aware, somewhere else. You can remember who you were, the people you loved, the pain, the joy, all of it, vivid and intact. Your physical brain stopped functioning minutes ago. There's no heartbeat, no breath, but you are still you. It sounds like science fiction, a dream, or maybe something deeper. What if your memories, your most personal, most defining moments, aren't just stored in your brain, but somehow tethered to something beyond it? Something that might survive death? For centuries, humanity has told stories of life after death, of spirits, of souls lingering on. But today, in an age of neuroscience and quantum physics, a new question emerges. Are our memories simply fragile electrical patterns in the brain? Or are they proof that something of us remains, even after the body is gone? Memories shape us. They define our personalities, inform our decisions, and create the continuous thread of identity that we call self. Without memory, who are we? A blank slate? A hollow shell? Or something deeper still, something that exists regardless of what we can recall? But what if our memories are more than just mental echoes of past experiences? What if they are more than neurons firing in a particular pattern, more than fragile traces etched into gray matter? Some philosophers and scientists believe that memories might hint at something far more profound: the persistence of consciousness beyond the physical body. Consider this. We often think of memories as being stored in the brain, like files on a hard drive. But no one has ever physically located a single, complete memory. Neuroscience can map regions like the hippocampus or prefrontal cortex, showing where activity lights up during recall. But it still can't tell us how a moment of our past becomes a vivid, living experience again. The mechanism remains, in many ways, a mystery. Even stranger, there are documented cases of individuals who suffer traumatic brain injuries, losing major parts of brain function, yet retain their core memories and sense of self. In other cases, people who are declared clinically brain dead for short periods later report detailed experiences, memories, and even emotions. Could it be that memory, or at least the essence of it, isn't purely physical? From a metaphysical perspective, memories have often been linked to the soul. In many spiritual traditions, what you remember and carry with you, your regrets, your loves, your lessons, becomes a part of what transitions into the afterlife. The soul, in this view, is not only the essence of consciousness, but also the container of memory, preserved beyond the decay of the body. Modern discussions of digital immortality further complicate this idea. As we upload more of our lives, our photos, texts, preferences into the digital world, are we creating a memory-based shadow of ourselves? If so, can a copy of memory simulate consciousness? Or is it merely an illusion? There's also the idea of immortality through remembrance. We say people live on through the memories of others, but what does that really mean? If someone's actions, words, and stories continue to influence the living, does a part of them still exist? Is memory itself a form of immortality? At the center of it all is a profound question. If memories can exist without full brain function, or if they can be felt, shared, or preserved in ways we don't fully understand, what does that say about the nature of consciousness itself? And so we arrive at a pivotal crossroads, one that has divided philosophers and scientists for centuries. Is consciousness merely the product of a physical brain, Or could it be something more? Something that persists? Something eternal? At the heart of the mystery surrounding memory and consciousness lies a deep philosophical divide, a question that has haunted thinkers from Plato to Descartes to modern-day neuroscientists. Is consciousness purely a product of the physical brain, or is it something independent, something that might exist even when the body ceases to function? Two major schools of thought dominate this debate: materialism and dualism. Materialism, also known as physicalism, holds that everything we are, our thoughts, our memories, our sense of self, is the direct result of physical processes in the brain. According to this view, consciousness emerges from complex neural activity, much like music emerging from the coordinated movements of an orchestra. When the brain stops working, the music ends. Consciousness ceases. In this framework, memories are fragile and temporary, electrical patterns that die with the body. But this explanation, while widely accepted in neuroscience, is not without its problems. First, it cannot fully explain subjective experience, what philosophers call qualia. Why do we feel pain, love, nostalgia? Why do certain memories bring tears to our eyes or warmth to our hearts? These are not just data points. They are experiences. Materialists argue that subjective feelings are simply brain functions we don't yet fully understand. But dualists believe there's something more. Dualism, in contrast, posits that consciousness is not dependent on the physical brain. It may interact with the brain, much like a driver uses a car, but it is fundamentally separate. The brain may be the receiver, not the source. In this model, memories and consciousness could persist even after the physical body is gone, perhaps in another realm, another form, or another dimension altogether. The famous philosopher René Descartes summed this up with his statement, "I think, therefore I am." To Descartes, the act of thinking, the ability to be self-aware, proved the existence of a non-physical mind, a soul. This idea has influenced centuries of spiritual and religious belief, all pointing to the notion that consciousness may not end with death. Modern science, for its part, tends to side with materialism, but cracks are showing. Enter quantum mechanics, a branch of physics that challenges our most basic assumptions about reality. Unlike classical physics, where outcomes are predictable and objective, quantum physics introduces uncertainty, entanglement, and non-locality. Ideas that suggest the universe may be far stranger than we imagined. Some researchers, like physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff, have proposed that consciousness may arise from quantum processes within the brain, specifically within structures called microtubules. This theory, known as orchestrated objective reduction, OR, suggests that consciousness could be a fundamental property of the universe, not just a byproduct of biology. If consciousness is indeed woven into the fabric of reality, as space or time is, then death might not be the end. It might be a transition, one in which consciousness persists, not in spite of physics, but because of it. Of course, the scientific community remains skeptical. Quantum theories of consciousness are still speculative, and experimental evidence is limited. But they raise compelling questions. If particles can exist in two places at once, if information can travel faster than light through entanglement, then is it really so implausible to consider that consciousness might operate beyond the physical brain? Another philosophical perspective gaining traction is panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is a fundamental feature of all matter. According to this view, Even the smallest particles of the universe possess some form of proto-consciousness. Over time, complexity leads to higher forms of awareness, like human consciousness. If panpsychism is true, then consciousness doesn't begin or end with us. It's a constant, evolving presence throughout the cosmos. So, where does this leave us? Between the cold certainty of materialism and the expansive mystery of dualism lies a gray area, a place of tension, wonder, and possibility. We may not yet have the tools to measure consciousness outside the brain, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. In fact, many argue that the inability to explain why we are conscious at all points to a gap in our understanding, one that science alone may never fully bridge. This divide is more than academic. It shapes how we see ourselves, how we grieve, how we find meaning in suffering, and how we imagine our fate beyond death. And yet, as we try to peer beyond the veil, perhaps the best place to look is not in theory or speculation, but in the one faculty that connects us most intimately to our past, to our identity, and maybe to what comes after. Memory. While philosophy dares to question whether consciousness can transcend the body, neuroscience pulls us firmly back into the realm of biology. It asks, if memories are the gateway to understanding consciousness, where and how are they stored? Memory, in its most accepted scientific understanding, is the result of complex neurobiological processes. It begins with encoding, the process by which the brain translates sensory input into a form that can be stored. This encoded information is then sent to be consolidated, a stage in which memories are stabilized for long-term storage. Finally, when needed, we engage in retrieval, pulling those memories back into conscious awareness. Three major regions of the brain play crucial roles in this process. The hippocampus is the brain's primary memory center, especially responsible for forming new long-term memories. Damage to this area, such as in Alzheimer's or amnesia patients, often results in the inability to form new memories, while older ones may remain intact. The amygdala, closely linked with emotion, tags memories with emotional intensity. This is why emotionally charged events, whether joyful or traumatic, tend to be the most vivid and enduring. The prefrontal cortex helps with working memory and decision-making, often acting as the executive director that determines which memories are worth holding onto and which are filtered out. Despite decades of research and increasingly sophisticated technology, scientists still struggle to pinpoint exactly how and where individual memories are stored. Memory is not kept like files in a cabinet. Rather, it is distributed across complex neural networks, reconstructed rather than replayed each time it's accessed. Every time we recall something, our brain rebuilds the memory from its component parts: sights, sounds, smells, emotions. In a very real way, memory is a creative act. This is both fascinating and deeply humbling. It suggests that what we remember may not always be an exact replica of the past, but a living, shifting narrative. And yet, for all the brain's complexity, there remain anomalies. There are cases where individuals lose large portions of their brain, sometimes over half, due to injury or surgery, yet still retain functioning memory and personality. Known as neuroplasticity, the brain's remarkable ability to adapt challenges the idea that memory is strictly tied to fixed brain regions. If memory can survive such physical damage, does it imply that our understanding of consciousness is incomplete? Moreover, some patients with degenerative brain conditions, such as Alzheimer's disease, will suddenly experience brief, lucid moments of clarity, remembering names, places, and events despite the degradation of brain tissue. These lucid episodes raise provocative questions. Are the memories truly gone, or simply inaccessible through current neurological pathways? And if they are inaccessible, could there be another form of storage beyond the brain? Scientists have also explored out-of-body experiences, OBEs, under brain stimulation, such as in the temporoparietal junction. These experiences feel real to those who undergo them, often accompanied by vivid perceptions and memory formation. Are these purely tricks of the brain, or glimpses into a form of awareness not bound by the body? Then there's memory loss itself. Amnesia, dementia, trauma, all show us how fragile our sense of self can be when memory begins to fade. Yet even when memories are lost, people often retain an inner sense of identity. The emotional core, the feeling of being someone, remains intact. What is that core? Is it merely emotional memory? Or is it something deeper? Something closer to pure consciousness? As neuroscience advances, it answers many questions while opening new doors to mystery. We now understand the biological mechanisms of memory far better than ever before. But the question remains, is memory simply a product of the brain, or is the brain just the translator of something greater? To answer that, we must explore moments when the brain falters, when life hangs by a thread, and yet consciousness seems to break through. For that, we turn to the mysterious and often controversial world of near-death experiences. Few phenomena captivate and divide the scientific and spiritual communities quite like near-death experiences, or NDEs. These are the strange, vivid, and often life-altering events reported by individuals who were clinically dead, or so close to death that survival seemed impossible, but later returned to life with stories that defy our current understanding of consciousness. The common elements in NDEs are remarkably consistent across cultures, ages, and belief systems. A feeling of detachment from the body, moving through a tunnel toward a bright light, an overwhelming sense of peace or unconditional love, encounters with deceased loved ones or spiritual beings, and even panoramic life reviews, where every memory, every emotion, is relived in astonishing clarity. Some describe floating above their own bodies, watching doctors struggle to revive them with uncanny precision. Others recall being drawn into a realm of immense beauty, where time no longer seems to exist, and communication occurs through thought alone. These reports are often followed by profound psychological shifts, a decreased fear of death, heightened empathy, and a reorientation toward life's deeper meaning. From a materialist perspective, the explanation is relatively straightforward. As the brain begins to shut down, it may release a flood of chemicals, endorphins, DMT, or oxygen-starved neurons firing erratically that produce intense hallucinations. The temporal lobe, when stimulated, can trigger sensations of being outside one's body. The prefrontal cortex, when deprived of oxygen, may create false perceptions or dreams that feel intensely real. And yet, there are anomalies that refuse to fit neatly into the neurological model. There are NDE accounts that include verifiable information, details of medical procedures, conversations, or objects in the room that the person could not have perceived through normal means. In one famous case, a woman described a surgical instrument and conversations that occurred while she was under full anesthesia with no measurable brain activity. Her brain wasn't just unconscious, it was functionally inactive, and yet the memory was formed. How can we explain consciousness forming memories when the organ responsible for memory is offline? Skeptics argue these accounts are fabrications, false memories, or the result of residual brain activity we can't yet detect. But even if that's true, it only brings us back to a deeper question. Why does the brain, in the moments before death, produce experiences that mimic the afterlife so precisely and so universally? From a spiritual or dualist perspective, NDEs offer tantalizing glimpses of what might await beyond death. They suggest that consciousness is not extinguished when the body stops functioning, but instead transitions. In this view, the brain acts more like a receiver of consciousness than a generator. When it shuts off, the signal is released, not destroyed. Some researchers have even attempted to categorize NDEs, compiling data from thousands of cases worldwide. Their findings show that people of different faiths, or none at all, still report similar elements. This hints that NDEs may not be purely cultural constructs. In fact, children too young to have formed complex spiritual beliefs often describe NDEs with striking parallels to adult accounts. One particularly compelling element is the life review. Experiencers often report reliving key moments from their life, not only from their own perspective, but from the viewpoint of others they affected. They feel the joy or pain they caused others. This suggests not just memory, but a hyperconscious moral awareness, one that feels beyond biological function. So where does this leave us? Science continues to search for answers, and rightly so. We must remain cautious, skeptical, and empirical. But at the same time, we cannot ignore the deeply human stories that persist across centuries and cultures. NDEs challenge our assumptions about death, consciousness, and the limitations of the physical body. They remind us that the boundary between life and death may not be as final or as clear as we once believed. If memories can form, persist, and even evolve during moments when the brain is functionally inactive, then we must reconsider what memory is. Perhaps it is not bound to the physical, but tethered to something else entirely. Something eternal. Despite advances in neuroscience, psychology, and physics, one truth remains. We still don't know what consciousness truly is. We can track brain waves, map neural activity, and simulate parts of cognitive function with artificial intelligence. But the inner experience, the self that reflects, feels, remembers, remains elusive. It's not something we can weigh, measure, or even define with full consensus. And that mystery leaves open a haunting possibility. That consciousness and the memories woven into it may exist beyond death. But science, for all its rigor, is not designed to explore the unmeasurable. As philosopher Thomas Nagel famously asked, "What is it like to be a bat?" We might know every biological function of the creature, but we still can't access its subjective experience. The same is true for humans. We can observe the brain's processes, but we cannot observe the feelings or meanings inside a memory. And if memory and consciousness are more than physical processes, if they persist in some form beyond our measurable grasp, then we are forced to consider ideas we once left to religion or poetry. Could our memories be imprinted on a field of consciousness that exists independently of the brain? Some theories, like the non-local consciousness hypothesis, suggest that the brain is more like a receiver than a container. Destroy the receiver, and the signal might still exist, waiting to be picked up again. Then there are the limitations of language and perception. Much like a fish cannot understand the concept of air, we may lack the sensory or cognitive tools to comprehend what consciousness is, let alone whether it continues after death. This isn't a failure of science. It's a humbling reality of being human. What we do know, is that the subjective experiences surrounding memory and death, be it in dreams, NDEs, or even déjà vu, carry meaning. They push us to ask not just how do we remember, but why do we remember? Why do certain memories linger while others vanish? Why does the recollection of love, loss, or beauty feel so profoundly real? Sometimes more real than the present moment. We also face the stark limitations of empirical proof. If consciousness continues after death, how would we test it? How would we communicate across that threshold? In many ways, the debate is like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Yet, in this ambiguity lies a quiet invitation to stay curious, to remain open, to understand that not all questions are meant to be answered quickly, or maybe even at all, but they are still worth asking. And perhaps that's the point, the pursuit itself, the act of exploring what memory means, what consciousness might be, and what it could become after death, may not give us certainty, but it gives us depth. It makes us more human. So, are our memories proof of consciousness beyond death? Science doesn't offer us a definitive answer. Philosophy gives us frameworks, but not closure. What we're left with is something subtler, and perhaps more meaningful, a deepened awareness of the mystery itself. We've explored how memories are more than just neurological data. They're our essence, our story, the intimate bridge between who we were and who we are. They persist when all else fades, and sometimes they even appear when science says they shouldn't. We've considered materialist views and dualist ideas, felt the unsettling weight of near-death experiences, and looked at how the brain, marvelous though it is, cannot fully explain the rich, textured experience of being alive. Maybe consciousness doesn't need to survive death to be extraordinary. Or maybe, just maybe, the very nature of memory hints at something we're only beginning to glimpse. Something vast, timeless, and deeply personal. In the end, this isn't just about science or spirituality. It's about meaning. It's about love, loss, and the echoes we leave behind. It's about the stories we carry, and the possibility that, in some way, they carry us too. We may never know for sure what happens after we die, but as long as we remember, as long as we question, and as long as we feel, something of us always lives on.